James Winters had always taken pride in his company, Stellar Retail Group, which he'd built from a single store into a nationwide chain of 35 locations. With sleek corporate offices and impressive quarterly reports, James sometimes felt disconnected from the day-to-day realities of his business. This distance troubled him, especially after receiving concerning reports about employee treatment at some locations. "The customer experience starts with our staff experience," James often said in board meetings. But were those just empty words? A recent anonymous employee survey had revealed some troubling patterns that couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents. On a cool Tuesday morning, James stared at his reflection in his apartment bathroom mirror. The designer suit was gone, replaced by worn jeans and a simple button-up shirt he'd purchased from a discount store. His normally perfectly styled hair was hidden under a baseball cap, and he'd grown out his facial hair over the past week. His own executive assistant had walked past him in the grocery store 3 days ago without a second glance. "Perfect," he muttered. Today he wasn't James Winters, CEO. He was Jim Walker, a 45-year-old retail worker with a spotty resume looking for steady employment. James had arranged everything through a trusted HR director who believed he was setting up a secret shopper program. Store number 17 in Riverdale had shown particularly concerning feedback scores, with high turnover and customer complaints. If problems existed in his company, he needed to see them firsthand. As he pulled into the employee parking area behind the store, James felt an unexpected flutter of nervousness. It had been nearly 20 years since he'd worked on a retail floor. The store looked different from this angle, not the proud storefront he usually admired during official visits, but the neglected back entrance with overflowing dumpsters and faded employee instruction signs. Inside, he was directed to the manager's office where a harried-looking woman named Diane barely looked up from her computer. "Another one? Didn't HR just send someone last week?" she sighed, shuffling through papers. "Whatever. Fill these out. Training starts in 30 minutes. Don't be late. No warm welcome. No company orientation." James carefully maintained his neutral expression while inwardly cringing at how far this was from the onboarding procedures his company supposedly followed. The training consisted of watching outdated videos in a cramped break room with flickering fluorescent lights. 3 other new hires joined him, a college student named Priya, a retired teacher named Henry, and a young mother named Tasha who kept checking her phone for messages from her babysitter. "I'm just looking for something stable," Tasha explained during introductions. "Been through 3 retail jobs this year. They all promise regular hours then suddenly cut you to nothing or expect you to drop everything for last-minute shifts." James nodded sympathetically, mentally noting the scheduling issues that seemed widespread despite corporate policies against such practices. The floor supervisor, a thin man named Keith with perpetually narrowed eyes, appeared in the doorway. "Videos done? Good. Time for floor training. Follow me." The next 4 hours were a blur of contradictory instructions and impatient sighs whenever one of the new hires asked questions. Keith seemed particularly irritated by James, who couldn't help asking about procedures that directly contradicted company policy. "Look, Jim," Keith finally snapped. "The manual says one thing, but this is how we actually do it. Corporate doesn't have to deal with real customers in real time." By lunch break, James retreated to his car, pulling out a notebook to document everything he'd observed: understaffing, outdated training materials, deviations from company procedures, and most concerning, a clear resentment toward corporate that seemed embedded in the store culture. He was so absorbed in his notes he almost missed his phone vibrating. The caller ID showed his CFO's name. "James, where are you? The quarterly review started 15 minutes ago. I can't make it. Something more important came up." "More important than the board meeting you scheduled? Several directors are asking questions." James glanced toward the store. "Tell them I'm conducting a comprehensive operational assessment that couldn't be delegated." I'll explain everything next week. After lunch, Keith paired James with a veteran employee named Raj to learn register operations. Unlike Keith, Raj was patient and thorough, explaining not just the how but the why behind certain procedures. "You catch on quick for an older guy," Raj commented, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that came out wrong." James laughed genuinely. "No offense taken. Been a while since I worked retail." "What did you do before?" "Business management," James answered truthfully. "But I wanted something different." Raj nodded. "Well, fair warning, this place has issues. Not the job itself, but the way things are run." "How so?" James asked. "Store management plays favorites. If you're in the in-group, you get the good shifts and decent treatment. If not..." Raj shrugged. "And it seems like they decide right away who belongs where." "And me? Keith's already marked you as trouble." "Too many questions." Raj lowered his voice. "Between us, I think it's also because you're, well, not young. They want people they can push around." James felt a chill. Age discrimination had never been on his radar as a potential issue within his company. By closing time, James was physically exhausted but mentally alert. He'd witnessed at least a dozen policy violations and concerning behaviors. Most troubling was the clear hierarchy that had nothing to do with position or experience and everything to do with personal bias. As predicted, when shift assignments came out for the next day, James found himself scheduled for the least desirable time slot, 5 a.m. inventory in the backroom, alone. "That's Keith's way of saying he doesn't think you'll last," Raj whispered as they clocked out. "Nobody wants that shift." James nodded, determined to prove otherwise. "See you tomorrow then." In his car, James made final notes before heading home. The expensive corporate training programs, the carefully crafted policy manuals, the inclusive workplace initiatives, none of it mattered if this was happening at store level. He had started this experiment wondering if there were isolated problems to fix. Now he wondered if the entire system needed rebuilding from the ground up. As James drove home, one thought kept repeating: this was just day one. James arrived at 4:45 a.m. the next morning, determined to tackle the inventory shift with the same dedication he'd given to building his company. The store was eerily quiet when he entered through the employee entrance, using the code Raj had shared with him. In the dimly lit back room, James found stacks of inventory sheets and a clipboard with vague instructions. No manager was present despite company policy requiring supervision for early morning shifts. Another violation to add to his growing list. He had just begun counting stock when the back door opened. It was Tasha, the young mother from yesterday's training. "They gave you this shift too?" she asked, looking tired but determined. "Keith told me it was just me today." James frowned. "Were you scheduled for this?" "No, I got a text at midnight saying I needed to come in. My regular childcare doesn't start until 8, so I had to pay extra for emergency care." She blinked back tears of frustration. "I couldn't say no, I need this job." This was exactly the kind of scheduling abuse corporate policies were designed to prevent. James felt a surge of anger but maintained his cover. "Let's work together," he suggested. "It'll go faster." As they counted inventory, Tasha shared more about her situation, a single mother of 2 young children, trying to make ends meet while studying online for an accounting degree. "I actually have good skills," she said, efficiently organizing the messy inventory sheets into a logical system. "But every time I mention my experience with spreadsheets and systems, Keith finds another reason to keep me on register or stocking." James noted how quickly and accurately she worked, exactly the kind of talent his company should be developing, not diminishing. By 7:30 a.m., they had completed work that should have taken a full team. Other employees began arriving, looking surprised to see them finished. Keith appeared last, coffee in hand, and frowned at their progress. "You missed the seasonal display section," he said dismissively, though it wasn't on any worksheet. "Actually," James replied calmly, pointing to Tasha's reorganized sheets, "we completed everything listed, plus reconciled the discrepancies in last week's counts." Keith's eyes narrowed. "Well, don't get comfortable. There's plenty more to do." Throughout the morning, James noticed how Keith constantly redirected Tasha to menial tasks despite being short-handed at the registers. Meanwhile, a younger employee who James observed making several counting errors was given customer-facing responsibilities. During his break, James slipped away to call his trusted HR director. "I need employee files for store number 17, particularly performance reviews and promotion histories," he said quietly. "And send me the turnover rates broken down by age, gender, and ethnicity. Don't tell anyone why." The pattern was becoming clearer by the hour. This wasn't just poor management, it was systematic discrimination, hidden beneath plausible deniability and far from corporate oversight. When James returned, he found Raj looking troubled. "Everything okay?" James asked. "Diane's on the warpath. Corporate is sending someone for a surprise inspection next week. Everyone's panicking." James concealed his surprise. He'd authorized no such inspection. "Is that bad?" Raj laughed bitterly. "They'll clean up for 2 days, put their favorites on display, and nothing will change. It never does." As his shift ended, James realized something critical. The problems weren't just with Keith or this store. The entire system of oversight had failed. Corporate visits were viewed as performances, not opportunities for genuine improvement. Walking to his car, James made a decision. One more week undercover, then everything would change. The next few days revealed patterns that disturbed James deeply. He observed how Keith and Diane, the store manager, consistently scheduled older employees and mothers for inconvenient shifts, while younger staff received preferential treatment. The divide wasn't subtle once you knew what to look for. On Thursday, James was assigned to work with Henry, the retired teacher who had started the same day. They were tasked with reorganizing the stockroom, a job that required heavy lifting and climbing ladders. "I asked to work register," Henry confided quietly. "My knees aren't what they used to be. But Keith said I needed to prove myself back here first." James helped Henry with the heavier items while considering the legal implications. This wasn't just unfair, it potentially violated labor laws by assigning tasks that could aggravate known physical limitations. During lunch, James noticed Priya sitting alone, looking upset. He joined her with his sandwich. "Everything okay?" he asked. She hesitated before speaking. "I heard Keith and Diane talking about me in the office. They didn't know I was restocking shelves nearby. They said they'd have to keep the Indian girl up front when the corporate visitor comes because it looks good for diversity." Her voice trembled. "I have a master's degree in business. I'm only working retail while I look for something in my field." James felt his blood pressure rising. Using employees as diversity props while simultaneously undermining them was reprehensible. That afternoon, James received his first paycheck, another eye-opener. Several deductions appeared that weren't standard company policy. When he quietly asked other employees, most hadn't even noticed, assuming this was normal. Later, Raj pulled James aside. "Keith's been asking questions about you. Be careful." "What kind of questions?" "Where you worked before, why you're asking so many questions. He thinks you might be a union organizer." Raj looked concerned. "Watch your back." Last person he suspected suddenly had their hours cut to nothing. The next day, James arrived to find his name missing from the schedule. When he inquired, Diane looked up with cold eyes. "We're cutting back hours. We'll call if we need you." "Is anyone else having hours cut?" James asked carefully. "That's not your concern," she replied dismissively. James left the store and drove to a coffee shop down the street. From his car, he called his executive assistant. "I need you to do something without asking questions. Call store number 17 and ask for additional staffing for a corporate visit next Tuesday. Say the CEO might attend." His next call was to his HR director. "The files I requested, what did they show?" "It's not good, James. Turnover for employees over 40 and parents is 3 times higher than other demographics. And I found several complaints buried in the system that never reached corporate review." "Who buried them?" Regional director approval was needed to escalate, and they were all marked resolved locally. "It's Greg Thompson's region." Greg Thompson, James had promoted him last year. The problem went higher than just store management. James spent the weekend reviewing company policies and legal obligations, making plans for sweeping changes. By Monday morning, he was ready. He arrived at store number 17 dressed in his usual suit, clean-shaven, hair perfectly styled. The transformation was complete. Jim Walker was gone. CEO James Winters walked through the front door during the morning rush, heading straight for the manager's office. The look on Diane's face when he knocked and entered was something he would remember for a long time. "Good morning, Diane," he said calmly. "We need to talk about some concerning practices I've observed firsthand in this store. I believe you know me as Jim." The color drained from Diane's face as she stared at James, her mouth opening and closing without forming words. The transformation from Jim, the middle-aged new hire, to James Winters, CEO of Stellar Retail Group, left her visibly shaken. "Sir, we weren't expecting." She stammered, frantically straightening papers on her desk. "Clearly," James replied, his voice measured but firm. "Please call Keith to join us. And cancel all appointments for the next hour." As Diane fumbled with the store phone, James noticed a schedule on her desk with several names crossed out, including his own, Henry's, and Tasha's. Keith arrived moments later, his usual confident stride faltering when he saw James sitting calmly across from Diane. "Keith, meet James Winters, CEO of Stellar Retail Group," Diane said weakly. Keith's face paled. But you were." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Jim Walker." "Please sit down," James gestured to the empty chair. "For the past week, I've worked alongside your staff, experiencing firsthand how this store operates. What I've witnessed is deeply troubling." James opened a notebook containing his detailed observations. Systematic scheduling discrimination against parents and older employees. Arbitrary reduction of hours without notice. Unsafe working conditions for certain staff members. Improper payroll deductions. And a culture of favoritism that has created a hostile work environment. Keith shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't understand the challenges of day-to-day operations. Corporate policies sound great, but..." "I built this company from one store," James interrupted. "I've worked every position from stockroom to register. Don't tell me what I don't understand about retail operations." James turned to Diane. "The most concerning part is how these practices have been deliberately hidden from corporate oversight. Your preparation for visits makes a mockery of our review system." A knock at the door interrupted them. A nervous employee peeked in. "Sorry, but there's a situation at Register 3 that needs a manager." "Handle it," Diane snapped. "Actually," James stood up, "I'd like to see how you manage floor issues. Let's all go." At Register 3, Tasha was dealing with an irate customer while a line formed behind them. Despite the tension, she remained professional and calm. "The system won't let me apply both discounts, sir," she explained patiently. "It's a limitation in our software." James stepped forward. "I can help with that." He entered his override code, demonstrating a workaround that corporate had implemented months ago. This update went out to all stores in February. Diane and Keith exchanged glances. The customer left satisfied, and James turned to Tasha. "Excellent customer service," he said sincerely. "When you finish your shift, please join us in the conference room." Throughout the day, James observed regular operations while summoning employees one by one for private conversations. By afternoon, he had spoken with 15 staff members, including Raj, Henry, and Priya, building a comprehensive picture of the store's toxic culture. At 4 p.m., James called a mandatory meeting for all management. Regional Director Greg Thompson arrived looking confused and increasingly uncomfortable as he realized what was happening. "This isn't just about store number 17, James announced. "The problems here reflect broader failures in our oversight and accountability systems. Effective immediately, we're implementing several changes." He outlined his plan: an anonymous reporting system that bypassed regional management, mandatory diversity and inclusion training, a scheduling algorithm that prevented discrimination, and surprise visits by executives working incognito. As for leadership changes, James continued, looking directly at Keith, Diane, and Greg, those will be addressed individually following this meeting. The atmosphere was tense, but something else was emerging: hope. James noticed several employees exchanging looks of cautious optimism. This was just the beginning of the transformation, James knew. The real work would be changing a culture that had permitted discrimination to flourish in the shadows. But watching Tasha confidently handling her register and Henry assisting a customer with genuine enthusiasm, James felt certain the company could become what he had always envisioned: a place where everyone could thrive regardless of age, background, or personal circumstances. The next morning arrived with a palpable shift in the store's atmosphere. News of James's true identity had spread like wildfire among the staff. James had spent the previous evening making calls, setting new policies in motion, and preparing for the day ahead. He arrived early, dressed casually but professionally, ready to implement the first phase of his reform plan. In the conference room, he'd set up for a store-wide meeting before opening hours. As employees filtered in, he noticed their curious glances and whispered conversations. "Thank you all for coming," James began once everyone had arrived. "Yesterday was revealing for many of us. Today marks the beginning of significant changes at not just this store, but across our entire company." He introduced Li Chen, a respected HR executive from headquarters, who would be temporarily overseeing store number 17's management. Keith and Diane were noticeably absent, placed on administrative leave pending review. Regional Director Greg Thompson had been reassigned to Corporate 4 special projects, effectively removing him from any decision-making authority. "My week as Jim Walker showed me that our company has strayed from its founding values," James continued. "The discrimination and favoritism stops today." He unveiled the immediate changes: a revised scheduling system that prioritized employee needs and abilities, a merit-based advancement program with clear criteria, and a direct reporting line to corporate HR for any concerns. After the meeting, James asked Tasha, Henry, Raj, and Priya to stay behind. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "Your experiences represent exactly what shouldn't happen in this company. But I also want to thank you. Without witnessing how you were treated, I might never have understood the extent of the problems." "What happens now?" Priya asked cautiously. "That's partly up to you," James replied. "I'm establishing a team to redesign our corporate culture from the ground up. I'd like all of you to be part of it, if you're interested." Tasha looked stunned. "Us? But we're just store-level employees." "That's exactly why I need your perspective," James explained. "This company has become too disconnected between corporate decisions and daily realities. We need to bridge that gap." Over the next few days, James worked alongside regular staff, helping implement the new systems while observing the subtle shifts in morale. Some employees remained skeptical, waiting to see if the changes would last beyond the CEO's presence. Others embraced the opportunity for a fresh start. On Friday afternoon, James sat with Lee reviewing the week's progress when Raj approached their table in the break room. "I have something to show you," he said, placing a folder on the table. "Some of us have been keeping records, instances of discrimination, scheduling manipulation, even altered inventory reports to hide shrinkage." James flipped through the meticulously documented cases. "This is incredibly valuable, Raj. Why didn't anyone report these before?" Raj's expression was both sad and resolute. "We tried. The reports disappeared, and those who complained found themselves with fewer hours or worse shifts. Eventually, people stopped trying." James closed the folder, his determination strengthening. "Not anymore. This evidence will help ensure those responsible are held accountable." As James left that evening, he spotted Tasha training a new cashier, her confidence visibly growing in just these few days of change. The journey to transform Stellar Retail Group had only just begun, but watching his employees already standing taller, James knew the path forward was clear. 2 weeks after James's revelation at store number 17, the transformation was becoming evident. The new management team, led by Lee Chen, had implemented James's initial changes with remarkable efficiency. Employee satisfaction scores, which James now required to be collected weekly, showed steady improvement. James divided his time between his corporate responsibilities and hands-on involvement at store number 17, which had become a pilot location for his company-wide reforms. Today, he was sitting in on a staff meeting where employees were openly discussing challenges and proposing solutions, something unimaginable under the previous management. "The new scheduling app has made a huge difference," Henry commented. "Being able to set my availability based on my physical limitations means I'm more effective when I am here." Priya, who had been hesitant to speak up in earlier meetings, raised her hand. "I've been working on an inventory tracking spreadsheet that might help us identify patterns we're missing. Would anyone be interested in testing it?" Several colleagues nodded enthusiastically, including Raj, who had been promoted to assistant manager after Lee recognized his leadership potential. The collaborative energy in the room was exactly what James had envisioned for all his stores. After the meeting, James received a call from his legal team. The investigation into Keith and Diane's management practices had uncovered evidence of deliberate discrimination that couldn't be ignored. "We have enough to terminate with cause," his head of legal advised. The documentation Raj provided was crucial. Several affected employees are considering legal action against the company as well. James sighed, disappointed but not surprised. "Proceed with the terminations, but offer a settlement to the employees who were mistreated. I want to make this right without putting them through lengthy legal battles." Later that afternoon, James met with Tasha, who had accepted a role on the corporate culture redesign team. Her accounting background, which Keith had deliberately overlooked, made her valuable for analyzing how company policies affected different employee demographics. "I've been comparing turnover rates across all stores," she explained, showing him her findings. The pattern at store number 17 wasn't an anomaly. 6 other locations show similar disparities in how different employee groups are treated. James studied the data with growing concern. "We need to address this immediately. Can you prepare this presentation for the board meeting next week?" Tasha looked startled. "Me? Present to the board? Who better?" James smiled reassuringly. "You've lived this experience and have the analytical skills to make the case for system-wide changes." As James walked through the store before leaving, he noticed a customer struggling to reach a product on a high shelf. Before he could intervene, he saw Henry approaching with a reaching tool, a new accommodation provided to ensure he could assist customers without physical strain. "Let me help you with that, ma'am," Henry said warmly, easily retrieving the item. The customer thanked him, commenting on the helpful service. It was a small moment, but it represented everything James was working toward: employees empowered to use their strengths, customers receiving better service, and barriers removed that had nothing to do with ability. Back in his car, James reviewed his notes for the company-wide announcement scheduled for tomorrow. The changes at store number 17 were just the beginning. The real challenge would be scaling these reforms across all 35 locations while ensuring the culture shift took root deeply enough to prevent backsliding into old patterns. But watching the store team in action today, James felt genuinely optimistic for the first time since beginning his undercover journey. 1 month into the transformation process, James stood in the corporate headquarters main conference room, surrounded by the newly formed Culture Change Task Force, a diverse group including store employees like Tasha and Raj, corporate team members, and outside consultants specializing in workplace equity. The preliminary results from our pilot stores are encouraging, James announced, gesturing to the data displayed on screen. Customer satisfaction up 12%, employee turnover down 23%, and productivity metrics improved across all departments. 7 stores had now implemented the new management approach pioneered at store number 17. Each location had revealed its own challenges, but the consistent theme remained: when discriminatory practices were eliminated and employees were valued for their contributions rather than superficial characteristics, everyone benefited, including the bottom line. We're still meeting resistance from some regional managers, Lee Chun noted. Particularly those who came up under Greg Thompson's leadership. James nodded. Which is why today's board presentation is so crucial. Tasha, are you ready? Tasha smoothed her new blazer nervously but nodded with determination. In the past month, she had grown from a hesitant cashier to a confident analyst whose insights were reshaping company policy. Her presentation would show the board exactly how discrimination had affected both employees and profitability. The boardroom was intimidating, 12 executive faces turned toward Tasha as she was introduced. But when she began speaking, sharing both data and personal experiences, the atmosphere shifted from skepticism to engaged attention. By systematically pushing out experienced workers and parents, we've been losing an average of 247 combined years of retail experience annually, she explained, highlighting a particularly striking graph. The cost of continually hiring and training replacements has been approximately $3.2 million per year, money that could have been invested in employee development or customer experience improvements. When Tasha finished, several board members asked thoughtful questions. One older board member spoke up with particular emotion. I started in retail at age 16 and worked my way up. I never imagined our company could be part of the problem I fought against throughout my career. This needs our full support. The board voted unanimously to expand the reform initiative company-wide, with quarterly progress reviews and executive compensation tied to diversity and inclusion metrics. Afterward, James found Tasha in the hallway, still processing her success. That was phenomenal, he told her sincerely. How do you feel? Like I finally got to use all of myself at work, she replied. My experience, my education, my perspective, not just the parts someone else decided were valuable. Later that day, James visited store number 17 again, where Raj was leading a training session for managers from other locations. The store had become something of a showpiece, not because it was artificially polished for corporate visits, but because its authentic, inclusive culture was creating genuine results. As James observed the training, his phone buzzed with a text from Henry, just wanted to share, got Employee of the Month. First time in my life. Never too old to be recognized, I guess. James smiled, tucking the phone away. The road ahead would still have challenges. Cultural change didn't happen overnight, and some long-time managers would resist the new direction. But watching Raj confidently guiding his peers through real-world scenarios of inclusive management, James felt the company moving steadily toward becoming what it should have been all along. The story that had begun with discrimination faced by an undercover CEO was transforming into something more powerful, a blueprint for change that could influence not just one company, but perhaps an entire industry. 6 months after James's undercover experience, Stellar Retail Group had undergone a remarkable transformation. All 35 stores now operated under the new management model, with impressive results that had caught the attention of business publications and industry leaders. Today, James was returning to store number 17 for a special reason. The location was hosting the company's first Inclusive Excellence Awards, recognizing employees whose contributions embodied the reformed corporate values. The store looked different now, brighter, more welcoming, with an energy that was palpable as soon as you walked through the doors. "Welcome back, Mr. Winters," greeted a new employee at the entrance. Even the staff who hadn't been present during James's undercover days knew the story. It had become part of the company's evolving narrative. Inside, the store had been transformed for the event. A small stage stood where seasonal displays usually resided, surrounded by chairs filled with employees from various stores. James spotted many familiar faces, Henry chatting animatedly with colleagues, Priya setting up a presentation, and Raj reviewing note cards for his speech as Master of Ceremonies. "There he is," came a voice beside him. Tasha approached, no longer the uncertain employee he'd first met. Now Stellar's Director of Workplace Culture, she had spearheaded many of the company's most successful initiatives. "How does it feel to be back where it all started?" she asked. "Like visiting a completely different store," James replied honestly. "In the best possible way." The ceremony began with Raj welcoming everyone and acknowledging the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, many of us were considering leaving this company, he admitted. Today, we're celebrating not just survival, but real transformation. Awards were presented for innovation, customer experience, and community impact. Henry received recognition for his mentorship program, pairing experienced retail workers with new hires. Priya was honored for her inventory system, now implemented company-wide, which had significantly reduced costs and environmental waste. When it was James's turn to speak, he looked out at the gathered employees with genuine pride. "The true test of leadership isn't how we behave when everyone's watching," he began. "It's what happens in the everyday moments when we think no one sees. My week undercover showed me how far we had strayed from our values, but your response to these changes has shown me how quickly authentic transformation can happen when people are empowered to contribute their best." He revealed the company's latest initiative, an internal promotion pathway specifically designed to identify talent regardless of background or circumstances. Already, 14 employees who might have been overlooked under the old system had advanced to management positions. "The data speaks for itself," James continued. "Employee satisfaction at an all-time high. Customer loyalty numbers exceeding our 5-year projections. And quarterly profits reflecting that doing the right thing is also good business." After the ceremony, as attendees enjoyed refreshments and conversation, James found himself beside a display featuring photos documenting the company's journey, including a somewhat embarrassing image of Jim Walker, in his baseball cap and worn jeans. "Should we take that one down?" Raj asked with a grin, noticing James studying the photo. "Absolutely not," James replied. "That's the most important picture here. It reminds us how easy it is to miss what's happening right in front of us if we're not paying attention." As the event wound down, James watched his employees, confident, engaged, and most importantly, valued for their unique contributions. The transformation wasn't just about policies or procedures, it was about people being seen for who they truly were. What had begun as one CEO's eye-opening experience had become a case study in how confronting discrimination could lead to something greater, a workplace where everyone had the opportunity to thrive. 1 year to the day after James had first walked into store number 17 as Jim Walker, he stood on the stage of a major business conference, ready to share the journey that had transformed not just his company, but his understanding of leadership. In the audience sat the entire executive team of Stellar Retail Group, alongside representatives from every store, including Henry, Raj, Priya, and Tasha, who now held the title of Vice President of People and Culture. Their presence was a testament to how far they had come together. When I went undercover in my own company, James began, I expected to find some operational issues that needed addressing. What I discovered instead was a culture that had quietly permitted discrimination to flourish while looking perfect on paper. The large screen behind him displayed key metrics from the past year: employee retention up 45%, internal promotions doubled, customer satisfaction scores at record highs, and profits exceeding projections by 18%. These numbers tell one story, James continued, but the real success lies in the individual experiences of our team members. People who were once sidelined because of their age or family status are now leading departments. Employees who were afraid to speak up now shape our policies. He shared specific examples, with permission, Henry developing a training program that specifically addressed age bias in retail, Priya leading technology innovation across the company, Raj pioneering new approaches to equitable scheduling that had been adopted by several other retail chains. The greatest lesson I learned is that discrimination doesn't always announce itself. It hides in seemingly neutral policies, in unconscious biases, in systems that favor some while creating barriers for others. And it costs us, not just morally, but financially and operationally. As James concluded his speech, he invited Tasha to join him on stage. Together, they unveiled Stellar's newest initiative, a retail industry coalition committed to workplace equity, with 10 major competitors already signed on. What began as one CEO's wake-up call has become something much bigger, Tasha explained to the audience. We're now working to transform not just our company, but our entire industry. The applause was thunderous, but for James, the most meaningful response came later, during the reception. A young store manager approached him somewhat nervously. "Your story inspired me to take a closer look at my own team," she confided. "I realized I was making the same mistakes. We've started making changes, and already the difference is remarkable." James smiled, recognizing the ripple effect that one experience could create. What had begun with discrimination faced in a single store had sparked a movement that was now spreading far beyond Stellar's walls. As he looked around at the gathered retail leaders earnestly discussing inclusive practices, James knew that the most important part of his undercover journey wasn't what he had discovered, but what those discoveries had set in motion.